What would you do if your only daughter looked you in the eyes in a house you bought for her and called you sir like a stranger? How do you stay calm when you realize your child has been turned into a live-in maid in the 4.5 Mariler's home that legally sits on your signature? And how far can a quiet father go, using only contracts and institutions, to pull his daughter out of the gilded cage she doesn't even see? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is David Cole, and if you saw my place today, you would never guess that people once wrote about my projects in business magazines. I live in a modest condo with old hardwood floors, a small kitchen, and a living room that still smells faintly of sawdust from the model houses I built on the coffee table when my daughter was little. Most days are quiet now. I make coffee, read the paper, and look out at a view that is more parking lot than skyline. That morning, though, the quiet felt different because of what was on my laptop screen. An online magazine had posted a glossy feature about a luxury property in the hills, calling it the Harrington Estate, a $4.5 million masterpiece of glass and stone. I knew every angle of every photo because I had walked that skeleton when it was just steel and dust. I knew where the weight of the beams rested, where the winter winds tried to press through, where the sun hit the terrace in the late afternoon. I also knew something the article did not mention. The legal owner of that house was not the Harrington family. It was the Cole Family Trust, and that trust had been created for one reason: to give my daughter Sophie a safe home and a future that did not depend on anyone else's last name. The photos showed the mansion in the best light that money could buy: a wide driveway curling up from the street, a tall modern gate, a grand foyer with a curved staircase, and a chandelier that looked like frozen rain. On one image, in the corner, I noticed a small figure blurred in motion, someone carrying a silver tray. For a second, I thought it might be Sophie, but the resolution was too low to be sure. The article described the estate as the center of the Harrington family's social life, a symbol of their heritage and influence. It called it a place where generations of Harringtons would gather. My name did not appear once, not even as a footnote. I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. I did not build that house with my own hands, not the way I built my first duplex 40 years ago, but I knew it intimately. After I sold my construction company and stepped away from the job sites, the money sat in accounts that felt cold and distant. Sophie was the one warm thread left from those years. She loved open spaces and light. She used to point at houses on hills and say that one day she wanted a studio with big windows and a view. After her mother died, I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would give her a place where she could stand on her own feet without worrying about rent or landlords. The $4.5 million house had been that promise made real. I set up a trust with a lawyer, put the house into it, and named Sophie as the primary beneficiary. I thought of it as a quiet act: no ribbon cutting, no speeches, just a signature that meant my daughter would be safe even if life kicked her hard. Now an article told a different story. It said that the Harrington family had restored and shaped the property into their estate. It used phrases like legacy, heritage, old money. It showed photos of dinners under the soft glow of string lights on the terrace, gatherings of people in expensive clothes, crystal glasses raised in toasts. In none of those photos did I see myself. That was not surprising. I am not the type who poses for social pages. What bothered me was that I did not see Sophie either, except maybe in that blurred shadow carrying a tray. It made a small, cold knot form in my stomach. I closed the laptop and sat there for a while. I thought about the last proper conversation I had with Sophie. It had been months ago. She told me that life with Ethan, her husband, was busy but exciting. She said that his family knew how to move in circles she had only seen in movies. She also said, almost as a joke, that his mother Margot always had comments about manners and appearances. She brushed it off as something she would get used to. Around that time, our calls became shorter. She was always rushing to the next event, the next dinner, the next something. I told myself she was just adjusting to a new life. People grow, I thought. They build their own routines. Seeing the article pushed that comfortable lie aside. I realized I had not set foot on the property since the early days, when we were still choosing fixtures and arguing about whether the pool should curve or run in a straight line. Once Ethan's parents stepped in, the tone changed. They began to talk about how large families needed privacy, how too many people coming and going made things chaotic. They never told me directly to stay away, but the hints were clear. Every time I mentioned visiting, they mentioned schedules, renovations, some vague disruption. Sophie told me it might be easier if we met in town instead. I agreed, trying not to take it personally. That morning, with the article bright in my mind, I decided to stop accepting that distance. My daughter lived in that house. My trust held it. If I wanted to bring her a small present and see her face, I did not need a printed invitation. I showered, put on a clean shirt, and took a small box out of the cupboard. Inside was a simple framed photo of her and me in front of the first house I ever built, both of us younger and covered in a fine layer of construction dust. I thought maybe she could put it somewhere private, a reminder of where she came from that did not involve marble floors and chandeliers. I wrapped it in plain paper, placed it in a bag, and drove up toward the hills. The closer I got to the gated community, the more the city around me changed. Old brick buildings gave way to smooth white walls, tall hedges, and quiet streets. The road climbed, and then the gate came into view, tall and solid with a small guardhouse beside it. I pulled up, rolled down my window, and gave the guard my name. He typed something on a screen, frowned, and asked who I was visiting. I said my daughter's name and her married name. He checked again and said that my name was not on the approved guest list. He spoke politely, but I could hear the weight behind his words. People whose names are not on lists stay outside. I told him that I was her father and that I used to work with the team that built that house. I kept my voice calm. Old habits from building sites die hard. You learn to explain things simply. He said that he understood, but that he could not just let me through without clearing it. So he picked up a phone and called the main house. I sat there in my car while other vehicles pulled up behind me, engines idling. In my rearview mirror, I saw a sleek black car with tinted windows. Someone inside waved to the guard, who signaled them to use the other lane. The gate opened smoothly for them. They slid through with barely a pause. After a few minutes, the guard hung up and told me that someone from the house would come down. I waited, feeling the familiar patience that construction had drilled into me. When something is wrong with a foundation, you do not fix it by shouting at the concrete. You wait, you test, you plan. I watched the tall gate, the tidy landscaping, the security camera on the post. Finally, the gate opened again, and a figure appeared at the top of the drive. At first, I did not recognize her. The woman walking down wore a neutral-colored uniform, with her hair pulled back and a small badge clipped near her shoulder. She carried a set of keys and a tablet. Her steps were quick but careful, the way people move when they are on the clock. Then she got closer, and my chest tightened. It was Sophie, my daughter. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there were faint shadows under her eyes. But it was her, no question. She came to the driver's side and gave me a small, professional smile, the kind you give to a stranger. She greeted me with a polite title and asked how she could help me today, as if she were talking to a vendor or a guest who had taken a wrong turn. For a moment, I thought she was joking. Then I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of warning, and understood that she was not playing. She was afraid of something. Her gaze flicked toward the guardhouse camera, then back to me. I said that I had come to see her, that I wanted to drop off a small gift. I kept my words plain. She kept using that distant tone. She said that unscheduled visits were complicated because of household routines. She added that the family expected staff not to bring personal guests past security. The word staff hit me harder than the gate ever could. I looked at her uniform again, at the badge with the house logo, and realized that in the daily life of this place, my daughter was seen as part of the service team. Not as an owner, not as a host, as staff. While we stood there, another car rolled past us through the gate. A driver leaned out and greeted the guard. From the passenger seat, Margot Harrington looked down toward the entrance. When she recognized me, she lifted her chin slightly, then stepped out of the car with careful grace as it stopped inside the gate. She walked down the drive like she owned not just the house, but the hill itself. She greeted Sophie with a small nod, then turned to me and thanked the housekeeping team for resolving the gate issue. She addressed me by my last name, in a tone that placed me somewhere between an old project contact and a persistent salesman. I said that I was just trying to see my daughter. Margot smiled a thin smile and said that in their circle, visits needed to be pre-arranged so the household could maintain standards. She added that Sophie was very busy managing the staff and that it would be unfair to her to disrupt the schedule. She spoke as if this arrangement was a favor to Sophie, as if being the maid in a $4.5 million house was some kind of upgrade from being my daughter. Sophie kept her eyes down, fingers tight around her tablet. The guard shifted awkwardly, and I could feel his discomfort. But the lines were clear. This was not my space. At least not on the surface. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. Yelling at the gate would change nothing, so I thanked the guard for his time, told Sophie that I hoped she was taking care of herself, and said that I would call later. She gave me that same careful smile and stepped back as the gate closed between us once more. That night, back in my condo, the silence felt heavier. I put the small wrapped frame on my kitchen table and sat across from it as if it were another person in the room. I tried to replay the scene in my mind, but all I could see was the way Sophie's eyes had changed when Margot walked up, how quickly she had slipped into the role of someone who did not have a father at the gate, only a problem to manage. I got up to get a glass from the cabinet. As I opened the lower door, my knee nudged the cardboard box I kept tucked away on the bottom shelf. The edge caught the light. I crouched down and pulled it out a few inches. The label on the side stared back at me in my own handwriting. Cole Family Trust. Property starter wrappers. Guarantees. Dust clung to the top. As I straightened up, my phone buzzed on the table behind me. The screen lit with a missed call and a short message from a familiar name. Lena, my old lawyer. She had written that she was checking in and that I should call if I ever needed to talk about the trust. I did not open the box that night. I pushed it back into the cabinet with my foot and closed the door, because I knew that once I started going through those papers, there would be no way to pretend everything was fine. Instead, I sat at the table with the small wrapped frame in front of me and let my mind drift backward. When life feels confusing in the present, I tend to walk through the past step by step, like checking a structure for cracks. I asked myself when this all started to shift, when I went from being Sophie's whole family to someone who needed permission to see her at a gate. In my memory, the old family house came back clear. It was a simple 2-story place on a quiet street, with a yard just big enough for a swing and a vegetable patch. I remembered coming home in my work boots, tracking dust onto the floor, and Sophie running down the hallway with paint on her hands, excited to show me some new drawing. Her mom had died when Sophie was still a child, and from that moment on, it was just the two of us. I learned how to pack lunches, braid hair badly, and fall asleep sitting in a chair after long days on site. There were nights when I spread blueprints on the kitchen table, and she sat opposite me with her homework, our pencils scratching at the same time. I used to tell her that buildings were like promises. If you cut corners, they failed people later. I said the same thing about relationships without even realizing it. We did not have much back then, but the house was ours, and it was solid. When I took the risk and started my own construction company, I did it for her. I took on projects other people did not want, stayed up late solving problems, and slowly built a name. Years later, when I sold the company, it felt like closing a long, difficult chapter. The money from that sale was more than I had ever imagined holding. I did not rush to spend it. I put most of it into plain accounts and lived almost the same way as before. The one big decision I allowed myself was about Sophie. I wanted to make sure that, no matter what happened to me, she would never have to worry about losing her home. That was how the idea of the trust and the hillside house was born. I found the property before she even met Ethan. It was just a plot and some early plans then, but I saw what it could be. A place with light, a view, space for her to paint, or work, or just breathe. I remembered sitting in a lawyer's office with a woman named Lena, going over the idea. We talked about an arrangement where the house would not be in my personal name or in any future husband's name, but held by a family trust with Sophie as the main beneficiary. It sounded complicated, but the heart of it was simple. The house would be hers to live in and use, and protected from other people's mistakes. At the time, I felt proud of myself for thinking ahead. I did not imagine that years later that same structure would be used to push me to the edge of my own gift. When Sophie first brought Ethan home, he seemed polite enough. He wore the right clothes, said the right things. He listened while I told him about building, about starting with nothing. He said he admired that and joked that he could never understand how anyone read blueprints. I remember watching him look around our modest living room and seeing something in his eyes I could not name then. It was not simple judgment. It was more like he was measuring how far he had come from people like us. Sophie was in love, though, and I saw how she glowed when he paid attention to her. I did not want to be the old man who ruined it with suspicion. The first time I met Ethan's parents, I understood the world he came from. Their townhouse was all polished wood, old paintings, and quiet, expensive furniture. Margot greeted me with that thin smile and a kiss on the cheek that did not feel warm. Thomas shook my hand strongly and then drifted toward other guests. During dinner, we talked about the wedding, about Sophie and Ethan's plans. I mentioned that I had been looking at properties and that I wanted to give the young couple something stable to start with. I spoke in general terms, not naming figures. I wanted to share my excitement. Margot picked up the idea and turned it like a piece of glass in her hand. She said it was charming, that I wanted to help, and that it would reflect well on both families. She used phrases like our shared legacy and bringing Sophie into the Harrington tradition. The way she said it made my contribution sound like a decorative bow on a box that was already theirs. When I mentioned that the legal structure would put the house in a trust with Sophie's name on it, she tilted her head and said that of course the lawyers would arrange things properly. Later that night, I realized I had been talked over, not really heard. As months passed and the house took shape, I spent long hours on site, not as the official contractor, but as someone who still loved the process. I walked with the project manager, checked the beams, watched the glass go in. Ethan visited sometimes, usually with Margot. They talked more about parties they would host than about walls or wiring. Sophie came up once or twice, eyes bright, and told me where she wanted her studio corner to be. Those were the moments that made the work worth it. I held on to them when, after the house was finished and the papers signed, my presence there gradually shrank. After they moved in, the invitations felt different. At first, I was invited for simple Sunday lunches, and I sat at the long dining table feeling both proud and out of place. Over time, the lunches turned into big events with more of their friends and fewer of mine. The conversation drifted toward deals and galleries and people I did not know. When I spoke, there was a slight pause around the table, as if they were waiting for the noise to pass before getting back to the real topic. Margot began to refer to the place as our estate in front of guests. The first time she did that, Sophie glanced at me, almost apologetic. The second time, she did not look up at all. The gap widened slowly, like a hairline crack in a wall that nobody notices until the paint starts to shift. Sophie called less. When we did talk, she sounded tired but happy. She said she was learning a lot about managing a large home. She laughed about Margot's strict rules and Ethan's obsession with hosting perfect dinners. I told myself that she was just adjusting to a new rhythm, that once the novelty wore off, things would settle. I did not want to think about the possibility that this rhythm was the new normal. Sitting at my kitchen table after the gate incident, I realized that the crack had already turned into something bigger. I had been pushed not just out of the house, but out of the story. The article called the mansion the Harrington estate. Their friends called it that. Only the trust documents and a small label on a dusty box in my kitchen knew otherwise. I felt a mix of shame and anger, not at them at first, but at myself. I had given them the structure and then let them repaint the sign in front of it without a word. The next day, I decided to go to the gated community's clubhouse to at least confirm that I was not losing my mind. If the world wanted to pretend that the house was Harrington property, I needed to hear someone neutral say what was actually in the records. The clubhouse was clean and quiet, with big windows looking over a pool and tennis courts. A receptionist sat behind a polished desk. I gave my name and said I wanted to check on some owner information for a property I had financed. I chose my words carefully. Old habits. The receptionist tapped on her keyboard for a moment and asked for the address. I gave it. Her screen lit up with details. She told me, in a calm, bored tone, that their system showed the legal owner as the Cole Family Trust, with me listed as trustee. The resident contacts and guest list, however, were all under the Harrington name. She said that was common in families where properties were placed into trusts for tax or privacy reasons. I thanked her and asked, just out of curiosity, whether the owner of record could make changes to access lists and security profiles. She said technically yes, but in practice they usually followed whatever instructions came from the primary residence. On my way out, I passed a big notice board full of printed event flyers, wine tastings, tennis tournaments, charity meetings. A small card near the bottom caught my eye. It was an early notice about a planned charity gala hosted at the Harrington estate, raising funds for a children's housing foundation. The image showed the mansion's terrace lit with lanterns, a place where, according to the caption, the Harrington family opens their historic home to support those in need. There was no mention of the trust, or Sophie, or the man who had wanted that hillside view for his daughter. I drove home slowly, letting the facts settle into place. The legal record said one thing, the social record said another. Ethan and his parents had chosen the second story because it made them look powerful and generous. Sophie seemed to live between those two worlds, slowly being pulled toward theirs. Back in my condo, I sat down and stared at my phone for a long time. I thought about calling her and telling her what I had learned, but I knew it would only make her defensive. She would say that I was making trouble, that these things were complicated, that Margot had reasons for the way she handled appearances. Instead, I sent her a simple message. I asked how she was, said that I had tried to visit, and hoped I had not caused any problems at the gate. I told her that I missed talking to her, and that I would love to meet for coffee somewhere neutral, just the two of us. I put the phone down and waited. Hours passed. I washed dishes, took out the trash, watched the light change on the walls. Late in the evening, my phone buzzed. It was a reply from Sophie. She wrote that she was sorry about the confusion at the gate, that they had to be strict for household security. She said that her schedule was very full right now because she was busy managing the house staff and events, and that she did not know when she could get away. She added a short line at the end that hurt more than any insult from Margot ever had. She wrote that she hoped I understood how demanding it was to keep the Harrington estate running smoothly. A couple of days after that message, I woke up earlier than usual with a tight feeling in my chest that would not go away. When something is wrong on a building, you can tell before you see the crack. The air feels different. That was how my life felt. I made coffee and tried to distract myself by flipping through an old notebook of sketches, but my eyes kept drifting to the cabinet where the box sat and to my phone on the table. I scrolled through my recent messages and calls. Most of the screen was blank space. Sophie's name appeared only in short, polite lines. Everything important between us had gone quiet. Later that morning, my old foreman, Marco, called. We had stayed in touch after I sold the company. He now ran his own crew and liked to tell me stories from the job sites. That day his tone was different. He said he had been at a hotel downtown doing some renovation work for a fancy restaurant group, and he thought he had just seen my son-in-law holding court at the bar. He described Ethan's face, his voice, and the way he laughed too loudly. There was no doubt. Marco said he did not want to gossip, but he thought I should know that Ethan was telling people about a big charity event at his estate in the hills, talking like he was a prince. Something about that made my stomach drop. I asked which hotel it was. Marco told me, then asked what I was going to do. I said I was just going to have a drink, nothing more. That was true on the surface. Underneath, I knew I needed to see my son-in-law in his natural environment, not at a family dinner where everyone acted careful. I needed to see how he talked when he thought I was nowhere near. The hotel lobby was all glass and marble, polished until it almost hurt to look at the reflections. The bar sat off to one side, lit with warm light even in the afternoon. I walked in slow, like any other older man stepping out for a quiet drink. I chose a seat at the far end, where I could see the whole length of the bar without being too obvious. It did not take long to spot Ethan. He stood in the middle, jacket off, sleeves rolled up just enough to show a watch that probably cost more than my first truck. Two younger investors sat near him, leaning in while he gestured with his glass. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough. He spoke about his flagship restaurant, about new locations, about a heritage family estate in the hills that would host a massive charity gala. He described the house as if it had been in his family forever, as if old portraits lined the walls and generations had eaten at its tables. He said it was the perfect backdrop to show their commitment to the community. One of the investors asked if he owned the place outright. Ethan smiled and said that the property was locked up in family structures, but that he had effective control and could move things as needed. My jaw tightened. I took a sip of my drink to keep my hands steady. He was talking about my trust, my house, my name, as if they were ornaments on his story. At one point, he joked that his wife loved managing the staff up there, that it kept her busy and useful while he handled real business. The investors laughed. One of them asked if her father helped with anything. Ethan waved a hand and said that her father had put in some early money back in the day, but that he was retired now and mostly out of the picture. He said it with the kind of casual tone people use when they talk about an old neighbor who moved away. I sat there and listened to my life being reduced to a footnote. It was not just about pride. It was about seeing how he told the story when I was not around to correct it. He was not just forgetting me. He was editing me out on purpose. When he finally left the bar, surrounded by laughter, he did not notice me at all. I let him go. There was no point in confronting him there. The bar was his stage. The contracts were mine. On my way home, I found myself taking the turn toward the hills instead of heading straight to my condo. I parked on a side street near the gated community and walked along the edge of the road until I could see the top of the mansion's roof past the trees. Delivery trucks came and went. Staff in plain clothes moved through the side gate carrying boxes and equipment. I did not try the main gate again. Instead, I watched how people went in and out when they were not guests. After a few minutes, I saw a catering van pull up to the service entrance on the side of the property. The gate there was smaller, meant for staff. No guardhouse, just a keypad and a camera. The driver punched in a code and the door buzzed open. As he held it wide with his foot, I walked a little closer. My heart beat faster, but my steps stayed steady. Years of walking job sites uninvited had taught me how to look like I belonged anywhere. I picked up one end of a crate he was struggling with and asked, in a simple tone, if he needed a hand getting it inside. He thanked me without a second look. We carried it through the open doorway together. The service corridor was bright and plain, with tile floors and white walls. It did not look anything like the grand foyer in the photos. I heard voices ahead, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of a busy household behind the scenes. We set the crate down near a back kitchen where staff in matching shirts moved quickly between counters, packing trays and arranging glasses. In the middle of it all stood Sophie. Her hair was tied back. She wore dark clothes suitable for a server and held a clipboard. She was telling someone where to put floral arrangements, her voice quick and focused. For a moment, I just watched her. She was good at what she was doing, calm, organized, precise. But there was no doubt how the others saw her. When a new hire got confused about seating charts, he called her boss with a small laugh, then corrected himself and said ma'am, in the tone people use for managers, not owners. Margot swept in from the other side of the room, not noticing me at first. She clicked her tongue at a tablecloth that had a wrinkle and told Sophie to handle it, because donors would be arriving soon. She did not say please. She did not thank her. I stepped a little closer, and Sophie finally saw me. Her expression froze for a split second. Then she glanced at the security camera in the corner and her back straightened. She walked toward me with the clipboard pressed against her chest, like a shield. She greeted me again as if I were just another supplier, using the same distant tone as at the gate. She asked if I was here for the catering delivery. I answered honestly. I said I had helped the driver with the crate and wanted to say hello. Margot noticed us then. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, then she smoothed her face into a polite expression. She thanked me in a flat voice for helping our staff, then told Sophie to get back to work. She added, with a little tilt of her head, that Sophie needed to remember there were boundaries between professional roles and personal distractions. Sophie's cheeks colored faintly, and she stepped back. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides, but I did not move. I knew that exploding there, in front of her, would only make things harder for her later. Instead, I asked Sophie quietly if she was all right. She said she was fine, just tired, and that she was proud to be running the household operations for such a big event. She used the same words Margot would use, like she had swallowed them. I could hear the strain under that pride, though. She looked past me toward the ballroom, where workers were setting up tables and lights. Each piece was going into place for a show that used my gift as a backdrop and my daughter as invisible labor. I left the house the same way I came in, through the service door with the catering crews. On the walk back to my car, my mind felt both numb and clear. The line I had been avoiding for months was now in front of me in bright paint. Sophie was not just busy. She was being used. She had been turned into a maid in the house I had bought, so she would never have to answer to anyone. And the people benefiting from that setup were rewriting history in bars and articles, cutting my name out of the frame. That night, the cabinet door in my kitchen did not stand a chance. I opened it and pulled the box all the way out, letting it thud onto the table. Dust puffed into the air. The label stared back at me. Cole Family Trust. Property, guarantees. My hands rested on the cardboard for a long moment. I did not open it yet. Even without seeing the papers, I remembered enough. I remembered sitting with Lena when we set it up, talking about why we were doing it this way. I remembered deciding that no matter who Sophie married or what happened to my health, the house would be protected for her benefit, not swallowed by someone else's family name or debts. I sat down and thought about Ethan's words at the hotel bar. Family structures. Effective control. He treated the legal framework like a prop in his story, not the skeleton that could still bite back if someone decided to wake it up. I also thought about my own early choices. When Ethan wanted to expand his restaurant, he had come to me with a business plan and a smooth pitch. He said that if I co-signed a loan and backed him with my name, it would help him get better terms. I remembered the bank officer explaining details. I remembered signing, trusting that my daughter's happiness was tied to his success. At the time, it felt like supporting her new life. Now those decisions sat under my roof in quietly labeled folders. They were not weapons. They were structures built to carry weight. For years, I had acted like none of it mattered as long as Sophie smiled. Now she was smiling while calling me sir at a gate. I realized that by pretending my tools did not exist, I had allowed other people to treat my life's work as decoration around their story. As I sat there, my phone lit up on the table. It was not a call this time, but a long message from an unknown number that resolved into a group chat invitation. The title of the chat made my mouth go dry. It said, Harrington Estate Gala, Core Team. Someone had added my number, probably by mistake, assuming it belonged to staff. I opened it and saw a stream of messages from Margot, from Ethan, from a few people with titles like Events Director and PR. They talked about sponsors, donor tables, and leveraging the family estate brand. They mentioned Sophie several times, but always as the one who would coordinate staff, handle back of house, manage cleaning schedules. Near the bottom, I saw one line from Ethan that cut through all the others. He wrote that once the gala went smoothly and press photos came out, it would finally cement the Harrington estate as ours in the public mind, and that after that, even Old Man Cole would have to accept that he was just another footnote. He did not know I could see it. He did not think anyone outside his circle ever would. I stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Then I set the phone down next to the box on the table. On one side lay their story in bright screens and careless texts. On the other lay the dull, patient weight of cardboard filled with signatures and clauses. For the first time, I did not feel like a man shut out at a gate. I felt like a man standing in a quiet workshop, staring at tools he had forgotten how to use. I woke up the next morning with the same image in my mind. The box on my table, my phone next to it, and those words from Ethan about how I was just a footnote. There are moments in life when you feel something click inside your chest, not like anger, but like a switch moving from one position to another. That was what happened then. I made coffee, sat down at the table, and pulled the cardboard box closer. This time I did not push it away. I lifted the lid carefully, the way I used to lift floorboards when I needed to see what was underneath. Inside, everything was where I had left it years ago. Folders with labels in my slow, neat handwriting. Cole Family Trust, house, guarantees, Ethan Restaurant, bank correspondence. It felt strange to see my own care coming back to me like this. I had done all this work to protect the future and then tried to forget about it once I thought Sophie was safe. I took out the trust folder first and opened it. I did not need to understand every legal word. I just needed to remind myself of the structure. The house was owned by the trust, not by me personally, and certainly not by the Harringtons. The trust existed for Sophie's benefit, not for the benefit of whatever story Margot wanted to tell her friends. As I moved from page to page, I could almost hear Lena's voice from years ago, patient and clear, explaining why we were doing it this way. She had said that life could change and that this structure would stay steady even when people did not. I had nodded back then, thinking mainly about divorce or illness. I had not thought about social theft, about someone taking the appearance of ownership and using it like a costume. I set the trust folder down and opened the folder with Ethan's restaurant guarantees. My name was on those pages too. My signature had helped him get better loan terms. The bank trusted his business in part because they trusted me. At the time, I had been proud to support my son-in-law. Now I realized he was out in public acting like he had built everything alone. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a breath. The feeling in my chest was not rage. It was something calmer and heavier. Responsibility. I had built this structure. If it was now being used to hurt Sophie or to erase her completely, that was also on me, as long as I did nothing. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Lena's name. Her message from the night before sat there, simple and open. I pressed call. When she answered, she sounded exactly as I remembered. Steady, professional, but with a little warmth underneath. I told her that I needed to talk about the trust and about some loan guarantees we had worked on together. I said that there were developments in my daughter's life that worried me. She asked if I wanted to come into the office that day. I said yes. We set a time, and when I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. The kind you feel when you know you are finally going to the doctor about a problem you have ignored for too long. Lena's office was in a plain building downtown. Nothing like the polished spaces the Harringtons liked to show off, but solid. Her door had the same small brass nameplate as before. She greeted me with a handshake and waved me to a table instead of sitting behind her desk. I placed the folders in front of us and told her the story from the beginning. I did not rush. I started with Sophie as a child, with the sale of my company, with the decision to buy the hillside property and put it into a trust in her name. Then I told her about Ethan and his family, about the slow shift in language from your house to our estate, about the article, the gate, and the way Sophie called me sir in front of security. As I spoke, Lena took notes now and then, but mostly she listened. I told her about Marco's call, about Ethan bragging at the hotel bar, about the service corridor where Sophie moved like staff while Margot snapped orders. I told her about the group chat message where Ethan wrote that once the gala photos went out, it would cement the estate as theirs, and I would have to accept being a footnote. Saying that line aloud made something twist in my throat, but I kept my voice level. I had learned long ago that the calmer you are in front of inspectors and judges, the more they hear your words. When I finished, Lena opened the trust folder and skimmed through the main pages, her eyes moving in quick, sure motions. Then she looked at me and spoke in plain language. She reminded me that the trust was not a polite suggestion, it was a legal structure. It named Sophie as the beneficiary. It named me as trustee. She said that as trustee, I had the duty to act in her interest, not to sit back while others used the property in ways that harmed her or twisted the purpose of the gift. She asked if Sophie was actually living like an owner or if she was being treated as staff. I told her the truth. Lena nodded slowly and said that there were tools inside the trust if I needed them. Ways to limit or end the right of other adults to live there, ways to change access and representation, ways to make sure the property was not held out as someone else's asset. She did not push me to decide anything in that moment. Instead, she suggested that I gather clear information about how Ethan was using my name and the property in his business. She said that I should also speak with the bank, because my guarantees and the trust backing were part of their risk calculation. If there was misrepresentation, they needed to know. I asked her if I was being petty, if all this was just pride. She looked at me steadily and said that there was a difference between pride and protection. She said that if my daughter was being used as unpaid labor in a house that legally existed to give her security, and if my money and name were being used to polish the image of the people doing it, that was not just about hurt feelings. That was about misuse of the structure I had built. She said it in a dry, precise way, but it landed like a hammer on rotten wood. Before I left, we talked about what might happen around the gala. I told her that Ethan and Margot were planning to use the event to show off their estate and strengthen their image with donors and investors. Lena said calmly that sometimes the best way to correct a story is in the same kind of room where it is being told. She said that if I decided to act, it should be through notices, bank conversations, and clear statements, not shouting matches at gates. I nodded. That approach fit who I was. I thanked her, put the folders back in my bag, and left with a clearer view of my obligations than I had had in years. My next stop was the private bank where Ethan had taken his expansion loans. The branch was bright with glass walls and quiet furniture. I asked to speak with Grace, the credit officer who handled commercial accounts. When I sat in her office, I told her that I needed to review some guarantees I had signed years ago. I explained that my name and the Cole Family Trust were connected to Ethan's loans and that I had concerns about how he was presenting the underlying property and my involvement to others. Grace checked the system and confirmed what I already knew. The bank had given Ethan favorable terms, in part because I had a long, stable history and because the mansion was held in a trust associated with my name. She said that from the bank's point of view, that meant they had trusted my reputation as much as his business plan. I told her, in measured words, that Ethan was now talking in public as if the house were his hereditary estate and as if I were some small early investor who no longer mattered. I said that he was using the image of the property to attract investors and hosts, calling it a Harrington family asset. Grace did not react with drama. She simply grew more serious. She said that the bank took misrepresentations seriously, especially when they involved collateral or implied control. She asked if I had any proof of how Ethan was talking about the house. I mentioned the article, the bar conversation Marco had overheard, and the gala invitations that called it the Harrington estate. I offered to forward what I had. She said that if I did so, the bank would review the loan terms and consider whether conditions had been breached. She also reminded me that, as guarantor, I had the right to withdraw future support in certain circumstances, though that process had to be managed carefully. I left the bank with a new understanding. Ethan liked to act as if paperwork was just background noise, something other people handled while he worked the room. But those papers were the reason the bank had trusted him in the first place. Without my signature and the trust's name in their system, he would not be standing in that hotel bar bragging about expansion. The last place I visited that week was not glamorous either. It was a small office belonging to a charity that worked with housing for children and families. The same charity mentioned on the gala flyer. I had looked them up after seeing their name. Their building was plain, their furniture a little worn, but there was a sense of purpose in the way people moved through the space. I met with the director, a woman named Olivia. She greeted me with tired eyes and a firm handshake. I told her that I had seen they were partnering with the Harrington family for a gala. I asked what their main needs were, what they hoped to fund. She spoke with a kind of tired passion about families who could not find stable places to live, about kids doing homework in cars, about long waiting lists. She said that events like the gala were important because they brought in donors who cared more about photos than policy, but that the money still helped. I listened and thought about how my house, which was supposed to be a safe place for my daughter, had turned into a stage for this family's image game. I did not tell Olivia the whole story. Instead, I said that I was interested in supporting their work in a more direct and stable way, in my own name and in Sophie's. I asked what kind of long-term support made the biggest difference. She explained some options, steady monthly funding, sponsorship of specific housing units, and so on. I told her I needed to think, but that I wanted any support I gave to be tied to real shelter, not just a nice photo. She nodded and said that this was the kind of conversation she wished more donors wanted to have. On my way home, I stopped by the courthouse. Not because I had anything to file that day, but because I wanted to remind myself what the inside of those walls felt like. The lobby was busy in a low, steady way. People sat on benches clutching papers, some anxious, some bored. A notary station sat off to one side where people brought documents to be stamped. I watched for a while and thought about how many lives had been shaped in that building by words on paper. Divorce decrees, custody orders, deeds, trusts. All those quiet decisions made under fluorescent lights while the rest of the city went on with its day. By the end of the week, I was back at my kitchen table with the box emptied and its contents now sorted into a neat binder Lena had given me. The front of it was plain, just a simple label with my last name. Inside, I had separated trust information, loan guarantees, correspondence with the bank, and notes from my meetings. I was not holding weapons. I was holding responsibilities. I knew now exactly where my power began and ended. I could not control what Ethan said in hotel bars. I could control whether my name and property continued to be the ground under his feet. That night, as I sat with the binder closed in front of me, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an old business partner who still followed high society news. He had forwarded a digital gala invitation and added a short line. He wrote that he had not realized the Harrington family now owned my hillside project, and asked if I would be there, since they were calling it their historic estate. I stared at the screen, then at the binder. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like the one on the outside of the glass. I felt like a man who had finally remembered where the main switch was. Flipping that switch in my mind did not change the world overnight, but it changed how I moved through it. The next morning, I woke with the same steady weight in my chest, but it was no longer just heaviness. It felt like a decision that had grown roots during the night. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened the binder Lena had helped me organize. The pages were familiar now. I did not read every line. I did not need to. I knew enough about where things began and ended. The question in front of me was simple, even if the consequences were not. I had to choose whether I would keep letting Ethan and his family use the structure I had built to erase me and bend my daughter, or whether I would finally stand next to my work instead of letting others stand on it. I called Lena first. When she answered, I told her that I had thought about our conversation and that I was ready to take steps. I said that I did not want anything reckless or loud. I wanted things done in a way that would hold up in cold light if anyone ever put them on a table in a courthouse or a bank. She said that this was the only way she worked. We talked about timing. I told her about the gala date and how Ethan planned to use that night as a stage to lock the story in place forever. Lena said that if I wanted to correct the story, it made sense to choose the same stage. She outlined in broad strokes a sequence of actions, using phrases like notices, communication with institutions, and preparation for changes to occupancy. I listened carefully, feeling that switch inside me settle more firmly into its new position. After we hung up, I sent her a short confirmation by email, using simple words and no emotion, just like I would send a change order on a job site. Then I forwarded the gala invitation and screenshots of Ethan's messages from the group chat, where he talked about cementing the Harrington estate in people's minds and reducing me to a footnote. Lena replied that she had received everything and that she would draft what needed to be drafted. She did not describe the documents in detail, and I did not ask her to. It was enough to know that the processes were moving. My next call was to Grace at the bank. I thanked her for meeting with me earlier and told her that I wanted to formally put my concerns on record. I explained, in a calm voice, that Ethan was publicly representing the hillside property as his family estate and suggesting that he could move it or leverage it at will. I said that in reality, the property was locked in a trust for my daughter and that my guarantees had been given under the assumption that nobody would misrepresent ownership or control. I told her that if the bank continued to rely on that property as part of Ethan's risk profile, they needed to know the truth. Grace listened without interruption and said that written confirmation would help them conduct a formal review. I said I would send it. When I ended the call, I drafted a short, clear letter and attached copies of the magazine article and the gala invitation. I did not use angry words. I used the kind of language I had seen on inspection reports. Observed, noted, inconsistent with. With those two pillars shifting into place, I turned to the third piece I had started to move, the charity. I requested another short meeting with Olivia. When we sat in her small office, I told her that I had decided to support their work in a more substantial way, but that there was something I needed her to understand. I said that a large part of my life's work had gone into a house now being used as a backdrop for the gala, and that I wanted any serious contribution from me to be tied to the people who actually needed housing, not to a family's image. I asked her if it would be possible for any major donation associated with that house to be recognized in my name and in Sophie's name, rather than under the Harrington banner. I did not explain all the family politics. I simply said that I wanted the credit, if it existed, to match the reality of who had put the structure in place. Olivia thought for a moment. Then she said that charities often had to balance host families' wishes with the truth about where funds came from. She added that they valued transparency, and that if I was the one funding a significant portion of the project, it would be right to acknowledge that. We talked about amounts and timing. I agreed to a level of support that would make a real difference to their housing program, spread over time. She agreed that, at the gala, if the moment arose, any major announcement about support connected to that house would name me and Sophie as the donors. We shook hands on that understanding. As I left, I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. If Ethan wanted to use my house as a prop for charity, he would also have to stand in front of the truth about who had actually provided the shelter. Back in my condo, I wrote everything down in a small notebook, the way I used to record changes on a site. I did not trust my memory alone. I noted dates and names. Call with Lena, call with Grace, meeting with Olivia. I did not describe secret plans. I just drew a simple line under them and wrote one sentence in plain words. If you do nothing, you are helping them. Seeing that sentence in my own handwriting made the choice feel harder to avoid. In the days leading up to the gala, I went about my routines almost as usual. I went to the grocery store, nodded to neighbors, paid my bills, but under those simple movements, the ground felt different. Every time I poured coffee or washed a plate, I saw flashes of Sophie in her dark clothing moving between tables, or heard Ethan's easy laugh at the bar, or saw that phrase about me being a footnote. My anger would rise in small waves, but it no longer spilled everywhere. It flowed into one clear direction. The afternoon before the event, I drove up near the gated community again. I did not go to the gate. I parked on a side street where I could see delivery trucks turning in, vans carrying lights, sound systems, crates. I watched staff carry in cases of wine and stacks of chairs. From a distance, the house looked like a stage under construction. I wondered which windows were Sophie's, if she still had a corner where she could sit and remember simpler days. I knew that, from inside, it must feel like the whole world was watching Ethan's performance. What she could not see yet was that the floor under his feet no longer belonged only to his story. Later that evening, as the sun started to sink, I took out the suit that still fit me best. It was not new, but it was clean and well cut. I ironed the shirt myself, smoothing each sleeve with the same care I had once used on drywall seams. In the mirror, I saw an older man with lines on his face and gray in his hair. I also saw someone who had not walked away from his responsibilities. I slipped the binder into a simple leather folder Lena had given me so it would not draw attention. I was not planning to wave it around like a trophy. I wanted it close, not loud. Before leaving, I sat on the edge of my bed and took a moment to breathe. For years I had tried to be the kind of father who did not cause trouble. I had swallowed slights, ignored small cuts, told myself that Sophie was an adult and had chosen her life. That evening, I understood that there was a difference between respecting her choices and letting other people twist the structure I had built for her into something that served them more than it served her. This was not a rescue fantasy. It was a correction. In the living room, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an old business partner again, telling me that he had been invited to the gala and asking if I would be there. He said he was curious to see how the estate looked in person. I replied that I would be attending and that I was curious too. I left it at that. People like Ethan believe that the story begins at the first flash of a camera. They forget that the real beginnings are often in quiet signatures and dusty boxes. I picked up my keys and walked to the door. On the hallway table, my wallet lay next to a small stack of mail. I slipped the wallet into my pocket and hesitated for a second. Then I took out a small photo from the mail pile. It was a copy of the framed picture I had meant to give Sophie, the one of us standing in front of my first house smiling with dust on our faces. I slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. I did not know if I would show it to her that night. I just knew that I wanted that memory close when I stepped into the room where people were pretending she had always belonged to someone else's story. Outside, the air was cool. I locked the door behind me and walked down the stairs slowly, feeling each step. At the bottom, I paused, checked that the leather folder was secure under my arm, and took out my phone one more time. On the screen, a small calendar reminder appeared right on schedule. It carried a simple title I had set days earlier, Gala, Hillside House. Beneath it, in smaller text, it also showed Olivia's name and the time she planned to speak. I let the phone vibrate in my hand until it stopped. Then I slipped it back into my pocket, stepped out toward the street, and headed in the direction of the house that everyone now called the Harrington estate, even though the foundation still carried my name in quiet print. The mansion glowed that night, all glass and gold light, full of people who loved the sound of their own voices. I checked in at the gate like any other guest, let them write David Cole, friend of the family, on a small tag, and walked into the ballroom with my leather folder under my arm. Ethan moved through the crowd, laughing loudly. Margot stood near the stage, greeting donors, and Sophie slipped between tables in dark clothes, carrying trays like any other server. Nobody looked twice at me. That was fine. I was not there to be seen until it mattered. After cocktails, the music lowered and Margot went to the microphone. She thanked everyone for coming to our family estate and spoke about heritage and generosity. Then she invited Olivia to the stage to talk about the charity. Olivia thanked the hosts, then said that tonight she wanted to recognize the people whose support would actually fund new homes. She said the largest long-term commitment had come from the man who built the house they were standing in and placed it in a trust for his daughter. She said his name was David Cole. Heads turned, phones lifted. I walked forward slowly. Olivia stepped aside. I did not raise my voice. I said that the house had never been a Harrington estate. I said it was owned by the Cole Family Trust, with my daughter as beneficiary, and that I was the trustee. I said that Ethan and his parents had only ever been permitted occupants, not owners, and that their right to live here and use it as their stage was now revoked in writing. A bank representative near the stage quietly confirmed that the property could not back Ethan's loans anymore and that his accounts were under review. Ethan stared at me, color draining from his face. Margot tried to speak, and nothing came out. Sophie stood near the wall, tray shaking in her hands. When our eyes met, the clipboard words and uniforms fell away. She set the tray down, stepped toward me, and finally called me Dad in front of everyone, while behind her an event worker quietly pulled a Harrington Estate banner off the wall and left the bare stone showing.